Yes, Mr. Dowden's on his way, Mr. Millett.
I hope so.
Yes. Right, Mr. Dowden, you happy to continue?
Thank you. Yep.
Thank you very much, yes. Mr. Millett?
Mr. Dowden, before we broke for lunch, you did ask a question by the chairman about water pressure in a covering jet and the maximum reach. I've got two questions just as a follow-up on that. The first is, what in your experience...
Sorry.
I'll start again. You were asked a question, I think, by the chairman about water pressure in a covering jet and its maximum reach. In your experience, are there any issues which impact on water pressure in a covering jet which might affect its covering, its maximum reach?
The only really effect on that would be the amount of hose on that covering jet, depending on the size of that hose. So, as we referred to earlier, a 70 millimetre length of hose, the frictional loss in that will be 0.2 of a bar. The 45 millimetre length, which I believe that covering jet was on the fireground that evening, was and the frictional loss is 1 bar per length of hose. So that's the only real sort of issue you're going to have against your pressure at the branch.
Right, and how, when you say per length of hose, how long do you...
23 metres.
23 metres.
Both a 70 millimetre hose and a 45 mm hose are 23 metres in length.
Right, thank you. Secondly, at the time when the covering jet was being applied, did either Firefighter Murphy or Cornelius tell you about whether they could or couldn't reach above the window in flat 16?
I can't recall a conversation of that respect taking place, no.
So they didn't come to you and say, well, we know you had told us to put water above flat 16, we can't because there's no pressure, or too little pressure.
I can't confirm that occurred. My recollection is that I don't remember that, no.
Okay. Now, in your statement, if you could go back to it, please, at page 4, 6 lines up from the bottom, you see the sentence, just after the sentence, at this point the fire was still within the compartment, but the window had failed in that it had broken. And then you then say, I then asked crew manager Dave Davis from G362 to send an informative message to control stating residential block of flats plus 20 plus floors, 25 metres by 25 metres, high-rise procedure implemented, 5-room flat on the 4th floor, 75% alight, MDT in use, tactical mode, Oscar. And you explain what tactical mode Oscar is. I just want to get a precise fix on that time with you, and then we'll move on. Could you turn to bundle of documents tab 23, which is the short incident log. And in that document, if we go to page 17, if you focus on the message that you're referring to, it's about a third of the way down the page, under informative. Do you see? No, above that. Informative SUP from G272 residential block of flats. That message there. Mr. Dowden, is that the message that you're referring to in your witness statement?
That's correct.
So we can put a time on that of 01, 16 and 02. And you can see an initial in the op column SAD, do you know who that might be?
I can only assume that would be the control room operator who took that informative message.
Right. And what does SUP from G272 mean? You know?
I wouldn't have understand what the SUP stands for, but obviously from is that message is from Golf 272 on the incident ground.
So, okay, according to your statement, you asked Dave Davis, crew manager Dave Davis from G362 to send that message, but it looks as if it came from G272. Can you explain why that was?
Just because I tasked an officer and he was from a station doesn't mean he necessarily has to specifically send it from his machine. At that moment in time, as we referred to earlier, Golf 272 was the instant command pump.
And it says in the message that you implemented the high-rise procedure, and I think you explained this morning what that was. Can I just ask you why the message seems to suggest that you implemented that at 1:16:02 and not on arrival?
Because when we arrive on the scene of the incident, I haven't had time to do my dynamic risk assessment in terms of choosing the safe systems of work, referencing to policies and procedures. That message can only be sent when we've committed personnel to the risk environment or to the hazard area, and I've implemented a safe system of work following the decision-making model as well.
If you look, continuing to look in page 17 of the short incident log, you can see that two entries above, the one we've just been looking at 01:16:02, there's an entry at 01:13:39, again SAD makeup IUP G331, make pump 6 and 1 HP, and then amendment to one aerial about 40 seconds later. So can we get from that you implemented the high-rise procedure after you'd made pump 6 and one aerial?
It doesn't necessarily work like that. When we try to explain a little bit more, when an incident commander or an officer turns up on the fire ground, from the moment we book status 3, which means we're in attendance at an incident, generally we have, the rule of thumb is within messages at incident policy, we have 20 minutes, a 20-minute window to get an informative message away, to let control know in terms of what the incident commander is doing and basically paint a picture up to the officers in control and monitoring officers, any other officers listening in to the main scheme radio. Okay, the incident commander, this is his or her decision, and this is the resources he or she needs. The only other side to that is that when we send an assistance message, a priority message, which will, in this terms was a make-up, I needed more resources, that also has to be followed up as soon as practicable with a informative message to inform control and monitoring officers who are remote from the incident why I have asked for additional resources.
Right. Now, we then go on to the next topic, which is making pumps 8. And as we do so, can I take you to your statement at the top of page 5? I've shown you this before. And it starts at the very foot of page 4. Let's begin there. I knew that the crews were now tackling the fire. So if you look at the very top of the screen, I knew that the crews were now tackling the fire within the compartment, but I noticed that the fire had now breached the window of the flat on the 4th floor and was starting to affect the external fascia of the building. And then you say, it was at this point that I noticed the situation was beginning to turn because the fire wasn't behaving in a way that I would have expected from previous experience. And you go on, it was sparking and spitting in a similar way to when magnesium burns and was making me feel uncomfortable. Now, was that point when you noticed that the situation was beginning to turn, do you remember whether that was before or after you'd made pumps 8?
My recollection was that was one of the markers in terms of the further resource in the incident to make pumps 8.
Was that moment when you noticed the situation was beginning to turn before or after you'd sent the informative message, which we looked at a minute ago, at 0116?
From my memory, that was after the informative message was sent.
After the informative
Yes.
message. And would you say that when you noticed the situation was beginning to turn because the fire wasn't behaving in a way you would have expected from previous experience, is that the moment you looking back on it, would say was the turning point and you crossed a line?
That was the first real moment, as I referred to in my statement, that I felt uncomfortable, and that's why I wanted confirmation from crew manager Secret at the bridgehead in terms of what was happening to the firefighting crew within that building. It's not uncommon for, as a fire within a compartment develops, and if a window has failed, for that to show on the external of the building, because obviously that fire is trying to search for an oxygen supply, and if a window or compartment has failed, then the oxygen supply will be external to the building. So that's a source of its oxygen supply. So it's nothing too uncommon. But I knew there was a BA team within that compartment, and I couldn't understand why that fire wasn't being suppressed.
Just trying to get a handle on more precise timings. I think you said that the turning point, as you've described it in your statement, came after you'd sent the informative message at 0116. You remember the video we looked at this morning, and I'm very happy to show it to you again, but timed at 0112, I think we could see pieces of molten and flaming material coming down from the building at 0112. I asked you about that and you couldn't remember, but on the basis that the video is accurately timed, would you agree that it looks like burning material was coming off the building at that time, 0112, and therefore earlier than you sent your informative message?
I can only refer to that. I've seen those images today, but my decisions, my actions were taken in what I saw that night, and previously I've put in my statement, and I don't have a reflection of a timeline of that night. It's so, for me that night, the decisions and the choices I took had to be very, very quick. I didn't have the benefit of working to a timeline. It was very much reacting to what I saw in front of me and what from my training, my previous experience, my colleagues around me, in terms of what I thought was the best and good intent in terms of resolve this incident successfully.
Yes, I understand. And when you saw the material coming off the building, leave aside timing for a moment, but on the video that we've seen, and I'm not going to show it to you again, but unless you want me to, I will do if you want me to, but when you saw what was coming off the building, what did you think it was?
At that point, it was something on the external of a building. I didn't know at that point it was what I know now in terms of flammable cladding, the ACM cladding. If we were aware of that risk and that hazard at that point, as we are now as the organisation, we put things in place. But yeah, I wasn't aware of this cladding material that was, put onto the external envelope of the building.
All right, let's take it in stages then. At the top of page 5, after the sentence about sparking and spitting, you say, I contacted crew manager Secret on the radio and checked that the BA crew were tackling the fire, to which he replied they were making good progress. Now, was that contact with crew manager Secret after you think you saw the molten and flaming material falling off the exterior?
Referring to my statement, I don't know if it was when I saw I can't say it was molten, and what from my interpretation of it was sparking and spitting. So the recollections, I don't remember sort of the fascia of the building falling. It was more of the way it was reacting. But yes, I do think that was around the same time that happened that I contacted Chris Secret. Yes.
Yeah, that's a very, I must say, it's a very fair answer. I understand what you're saying. So you weren't aware that it was molten material falling off, but it was sparking and spitting. But you put the conversation with crew manager Secret after that point.
I believe so. Yes.
Yeah. Now, crew manager Secrets has provided a statement in which he is going to say that he radioed you. It was he who radioed you and told you there was a fire in the fridge in the kitchen and that the fire was now out. Do you remember that?
I can't remember if it was words to that effect or exactly to that point, but I do remember getting traffic back from Chris along the lines of, hold on, let me get some information from the crews within the compartment. And from my understanding, you know, my recollection of what I put in that statement, they were making good progress in terms of into that compartment extinguishing the fire. I can't remember if he said it was extinguished. But, you know, my recollection of that event was that they were making steady progress into that compartment.
During that conversation, did you tell him that you were going to make pumps 8?
I believe that traffic was sent back into Chris on further resourcing it, because from my understanding, obviously from his point of view, they were dealing with attacking a compartment fire which they were, you know, making good progress on, and from what I was seeing on the outside, that was a different story. And so from what I understand, yes, I do believe that traffic I was further resourcing the incident went into Chris Secret.
Yes. And you could see the exterior, is this right? You could see the exterior because you were on the ground, but he couldn't because he was inside the building.
Yes.
Did you tell him what you could see?
Can't remember if there was a real detailed description of what was occurring on the outside of the building. I can't recall.
No. Let me see if I can just dig a little further. Did you tell him that the fire was sparking and spitting in a similar way to when magnesium burns and you were uncomfortable? Did you tell him any of that?
I don't recall I did, no.
He says in his statement, and I appreciate you haven't seen it, so I'm going to put it in a very gentle, neutral way, but he says that he told you to slow down because the fire was now out. Do you remember that?
I don't remember those words to that effect, no.
Do you remember slowing down what you were doing because of anything that crew manager Secret said?
Absolutely not.
You say absolutely not, with some conviction.
Yeah. I was, for me on that fire ground at that point, I was almost, you know, I was very much aware of what was going on in that building. I never at one point slowed down my thinking, my actions, no way.
And at this point, and I'm not going to be absolutely precise with the timing, Mr. Dowden, but at this point, when you're talking to crew manager Secret and he's telling you that he's put the fire out, did you get any messages from firefighter O'Byrne? Do you remember? On your radio?
I didn't intercept any traffic from firefighter O'Byrne, no.
Not at all. Did you know at the time that he'd gone higher up into the building at this point?
Not at that point, no.
He says that he was sending you radio messages to tell you about the conditions on the 5th, 6th and 7th floors. Do you remember that?
No.
Where were you, let me ask you, did you have a radio with you, a handheld radio with you at all times?
Yes, my handheld fireground radio was on my tunic.
It was on your tunic. And
Yeah.
what channel was it tuned to?
It would have been the instant command channel fireground channel 1.
The fireground channel 1?
Yes.
And was there a point around this time, or a little bit more generally early on in the fire, when you might have discovered that your handheld radio on channel 1 wasn't receiving messages?
No, not at that point, because up until that point, me and Chris had communication on that channel, and I seemed to be receiving traffic okay.
So, just so I'm clear, are all the firefighters at that point that are in the building communicating with you or able to communicate with you on channel 1?
Generally, the incident command channel should be left for incident command. So, incident command I put in place. Obviously, myself down at the ground floor level, and I would directly feed into Chris' secret on the bridgehead. It's not uncommon for firefighters to put traffic on that radio wave. That's not uncommon, but generally it will be for incident commanders or decision makers within that incident ground to communicate on that command channel.
Okay. If a firefighter who'd been sent higher up into the building, or had gone higher up into the building, with a radio, was going to communicate with anybody, who would it be? Would it be with you, or would it be with the bridgehead?
Generally, if it was in the internal of the building, then it would still be on channel 1, but the information, because it's inside of the building, would be transmitted and through the bridgehead, and then that information would come through to me.
And, from the bridgehead?
Correct, yeah.
So if, for example, Mr. Firefighter O'Byrne had wanted to communicate what he'd seen on floors 5, 6 and 7, are you, just to be clear, you're saying that he would have communicated that with the bridgehead, and the bridgehead would then have communicated that with you by radio?
That's my understanding, but from Firefighter O'Byrne, what he did inside that tower and on the upper floors and that traffic, then I'm not going to discredit in terms of how he communicated that, because obviously there was some valuable information, but I didn't receive that information.
But I think you are saying that there was at least a mechanical means whereby the radios could have talked to each other.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yes, okay. Now, when you say in your statement that you were starting to feel uncomfortable, you then go on to say, after the sentence about contacting crew manager secret, you say, I did not feel reassured due to the way the fire was developing on the outside of the building. You see that?
Yes.
What did you think was happening with the fire on the outside of the building at that point?
It's difficult to go back in that point of time to really pinpoint. I think my only assumption would be that the fire, if it was still going in the compartment, cannot pinpoint a particular memory of okay, how is that igniting on the external of that building. I can only refer, a lot of what we do as firefighters and officers is obviously we have policy to refer to, but a lot of what we do and the instantaneous, that split-second decision-making is based on previous knowledge. I had no previous knowledge on how that building was reacting. I had nothing to fall back on, no default in terms of my own previous knowledge of how that building was reacting at that moment in time. So, I did feel uncomfortable outside my comfort zone, because I didn't have any previous experience to fall back on in terms of how that building, the way it was behaving, reacting.
Did there come a point when you realised that the exterior of the building had itself ignited?
Yeah, without, again, I can't put a time on it. There obviously was a point that was evident, because of the way the rapidity in terms of the building on the external, the flames were spreading up the external of that building.
And can you help me with the timing, as best you can, in terms of when you first realised that the exterior of the building had ignited?
It's going to be really difficult to put a time on that,
Let me see if
unfortunately.
I can help. Let me see if I can help you. Was it? Do you think it was before you made pumps 8 or after?
I'd say it'd be on or around the time that I made pumps 8 or just after.
Now, we've got, just so we can get a time fix on that, you say on or around or perhaps just after. Let's be a bit more specific. If you could please be shown again, tab 23 of the documents bundle, the short incident log, page 17, time slot 01:19:35. Makeup, IUP, G272, make pumps 8. So that's when the short incident log records that decision as having been taken. Would that accord with what you remember of the night?
Yes.
Does that agree with it? Yeah. Good. Okay, so we've got pumps 8 at that time. I'm going to show you the video again, Mr. Dowden. Are you all right to see that
Yep.
again? Right.
Could you just remind everybody
Yes.
about the video, because people may have come since
Yes.
we had the adjournment.
Yes, exactly. And Mr. Kinnear is signalling madly to me on my right, so certainly. So I will repeat the trigger warning that we are about to see video and hear audio of the fire on the night, Grenfell Tower on fire on the night, and that people might find that uncomfortable and distressing. So if anybody doesn't want to see or hear it, then they should take steps not to do so, either in this room or if they're watching remotely, then not to look or to take themselves away from the media. Mr. Dowden, I'll wait 30 seconds or so. What I'm going to show you is a time slot of the video, sequences between 1:16, so around about the time, according to the message that that the informative message is sent, through to about 1:20. So that's what we're going to look at. So perhaps we can show that. I'm going to do the video twice. We're going to look at it first time round, and then I'm going to go through it, and we're going to be looking at what you see and what you hear from members of the public as well.
People on the block, bro. It's not high. It's not high enough.
Sta skandaler tycker jag. Sta skandaler.
Going up 2 floors and coming out the second floor above the gym. It's going.
That's going, they need to get up there. That's
It's going up. It's going up. The whole block's gone.
I think you can stop. Okay. Now, we can go over it again. You can see what's happening with the fire.
Are you okay?
Take a break, please.
Yes, yes,
of course you can.
Yes, of course you can.
5 minutes? Yeah, all right. We'll resume at 20 past 2.
Maybe Mr. Dowden wants a little longer.
Well, would you like longer than 5 minutes, Mr. Dowden?
10, please.
10, yes, of course. Well, that's what we'll do. We'll resume at 25 past 2. At 1, 2. Right, off you go in the usher. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm sorry that the break has been rather longer than I had originally indicated it would be. It won't have escaped anyone's attention. I'm sure that Mr. Dowden is finding giving this part of his evidence very difficult, and in particular when he's asked to view the film of the fire itself. But he is now ready to go on, and we will go on now, but we shall rise early. I shall finish no later than 4 o'clock. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Now, Mr. Dowden, are you able to go on all right?
Yes, that's fine.
And I've been told, maybe you've been told as well, but I've been told there are no more videos to watch, and we shall finish the afternoon no later than 4 o'clock.
Thank you.
It's a relatively short spell now, all right?
Yeah.
But if you do need a break, just indicate and we'll have one.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Yes, Mr. Willett.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Dowden, can I go back to a question based on the informative message in the short incident log? If you could please be shown tab 23 of the documents bundle and turn in it to page 17 up on the screen. It's a process question. And you'll see there that the informative message comes onto the short incident log at 011602, informative, sup from G272, and then we see the rest of the message we've looked at before. And I want to ask you just some process questions about this, really. What does the time 011602 tell us? Is that the message coming from Brigade Control to G272 confirming that the message has been received, or what is it? What actually happens at that time?
From my understanding, I've never worked in a control room, but I believe that will be the time the informative was received from the fireground at control at Merton, at that night at Stratford. Sorry.
Right. And does that mean that the decision, which was your decision, to send the informative message that we see there on the screen, was taken earlier than 011602?
That would be correct, yes.
And how much earlier? I mean, is it roughly?
A couple of minutes by the time you have the conversation, getting to the fire appliance, and then that message being sent. A minute to 2 minutes, maybe. I can't be exact on that. But,
so just talk me through the little bits of the process. You make the decision to send the message.
yes.
And then you communicate it to somebody.
I think in the instant of that night, because obviously I was quite busy on the fireground at that moment in time, I think it's not uncommon for another officer to designate that role to another officer on the fireground, and that was Dave Davis. But for him to have formulate the message, but obviously to make sure I see that message before it goes from the fireground, because I have sole responsibility.
Right.
And I believe that's what happened. He was drafting the message, and I was happy with that message, and that message was sent.
Right, I see. And did he press the buttons to send the message?
It's not pressing any buttons. That would be done verbally over the main scheme radio.
Oh, it's done right. So the button's on the radio then, if you like. Okay.
Yes.
And then that's received by Brigade Control, and what happens next?
Well, the control room operator will basically just take down that message on the message log on the computer system, and then that's then reflected on the incident report.
I see. And is that the vision log?
Vision, that's correct.
Right. Okay. Mr. Dowden, I'm going to take you away from the events of the night for a little bit of time. We'll go back to it, but I just want to take you away from that and ask you about a piece of machinery, if I can, the smoke extractor operating system. Now, in your witness statement, many pages on from where we're looking, you say that after you were relieved of incident command, you went to the ground floor lobby where you knew the smoke vent system was located. Have you had any occasion in the past, before the Grenfell Tower fire, to look at the smoke vent system in the lobby of Grenfell Tower?
I do believe on the familiarisation visit I was on, that I was shown that panel in the lobby area, yes.
Right, and you were shown it by whom? Do you remember?
I can't remember the individual's name, but it was I believe a contractor from Rydens or who was responsible for that refurbishment.
Right. Do you remember what they showed you?
It was more, from my understanding, it was more the location of the smoke extract panel itself. And I think there was discussion but I had an understanding of how it worked anyway, because it's not a unique fixed installation or fire engineered solution within a premise. So, but I can't remember the specifics, but it was along the lines of how it would actuate an event and how it works.
Okay, so not a fire engineered solution, so a familiar model, was it? A familiar...
Yeah, it's not something that's specific to Grenfell Tower.
And did the person from, you think it was Ryden, do you?
I believe so, yes.
Did the person from Ryden show you anything else apart from the panel? Did they show you the extractor fan units in the building?
No.
No. Did they explain to you how the system was supposed to work in the event of a fire?
I would suggest they probably would, but I had an understanding of that anyway in terms of how that would operate.
Right. And that understanding you had about how it would operate, did that come from experience that you've had in the past, or did it come from specific training? Or both?
I'd say both.
Both. Now, you also say in your statement, and we'll go to it if we need to, but is this right? You saw the panel, this is on the night, you saw the panel open and keys hanging from it. Is that right?
That's correct, that's my recollection, yes.
Now, and it's difficult to be specific with times, but roughly, when do you think you were relieved of incident command?
The only reference I have to this is back from the vision log, and I think I was in charge of that incident for around an hour. So it would have been between 10 to 2 or 2 o'clock in the morning.
Yes. We've got around about that time as well. The time of 1:50 estimated is what was in the original LFB log, but that seems to be right. When you went to look at the smoke vent system at that time, were you with anybody? Do you remember?
I believe at that time I was with Station Manager Andy Wharton, because there was a very short sort of handover to Andy Wharton outside, and then very shortly after that was another handover to another senior officer that came on the scene on the incident ground. And from that, myself and Station Manager Andy Wharton both went into Grenfell Tower.
Yes, okay. At that time, do you remember whether you knew whether the smoke vent system was working or not?
The two memories, the first memory I have is that the panel, you have a panel on the front of it, that was open and the keys were in, and that, I remember thinking that was strange because generally the panel would be closed, and also the keys would be in a secure location. That's either in a break glass next to the panel, so we can access those keys, or it will be in an office of some description, a caretaker's office. I remember looking at the panel, first of all thinking of that, but I don't remember reading any data or anything of any significance that would assist us on that night. I can't recall.
Now, if you go to page 10 of your statement, still on the smoke vent issue, you say at the very top of the page, you found it strange that the panel was already open and the keys hanging from it. You see that at the very top?
Yes.
And then you say that you found that strange. Why did you find that strange?
as I said before, just because, my experience of something like that description, it's not something that would be in that condition when you expect to see it. It would be something closed. You'd have to have access to the keys to get into the panel. So why would the keys generally shouldn't be in the panel, because it's not. It's something that only a responsible person or trained fire officers can access. It's there for a reason, and for no one else to tamper with.
Do you, just on the keys question, do you know where the keys were to be found at Grenfell Tower if somebody wanted to access the smoke panel?
I can't be specific in terms of where the keys would be located, no.
In your experience, what would you have expected?
In my experience, one of two things. It would either be in a premises information box that we'd have access to via a girder key, or it would be in a small round sort of break glass box next to the panel, or thirdly, it may well be in a secure location within the building that a responsible person would have access to.
But on the night, I think you've said, and pretty clearly, you don't know where the keys were to be found.
No, the only keys that I saw were in the unit already.
Right. And you then go to say, a couple of lines down, I went to the ground floor lift with SM Walton, Station Manager Walton, and saw that the smoke vent point was on automatic. Can you just help me? What does that mean, the smoke vent point being on automatic?
So it should automatically what happens is with one of these systems, a smoke extract system, you have a detector head in each lobby area where the flats, sort of in the communal area where they come out into the lobby. So if there's a fire in a compartment, i.e. a flat, and this detector head senses that, then it will automatically open what becomes AOV, automatic opening event. That goes into the protector shaft, that goes up the building and vents the products of combustion. So obviously we don't have a carbonation environment in a communal area. That's an automatic thing. However, there is a manual override. So in each of those lobby areas, there's a very small little box where you can, a key override, you can go from automatic to manual.
And you say, I went to activate the point using the keys and switch it to manual, but decided against this as interfering with any fire solution within a building can worsen conditions for both the residents and the firefighters. What would have been the purpose of switching it to manual, which of course you decided against? What would have been the idea there?
The idea would be to potentially, to try and clear the stairwell of any smoke. But I didn't have an understanding at that point of how the internal building was behaving, if indeed it was working, and generally something of that nature should only be facilitated within our policy as it is in High-Rise Policy 633 by the responsible person of that building or a trained fire safety officer of a station manager rank or above.
Yes.
So I was very conscious that I didn't want to actuate that in case I worsen conditions within the stairwell for either residents or firefighters.
Yes, and on that exact point, to the best of your knowledge, who was the first London Fire Brigade person to attend the fire who was an appropriately trained fire and rescue authority person? Do you know?
I don't know.
You don't know. Did you take steps to find out?
I didn't know on that night. I've since understand that it was a station manager called Dan Egan, but I don't know who Dan Egan is within the organisation.
All right. Now, in the next sentence, you say, I did inform Station Manager Walton of my actions. I then returned the keys to the smoke panel in the lobby area where I'd found them. Do you remember what Station Manager Walton did next after you told him of what you'd done with the AOV? In other words, left it.
I can't recall if there was a confirmation that he received that, but I do remember that he was obviously to my side, and that was something that I was trying to confirm to him, that I wasn't going to actuate it manually.
Can I show you a document, very briefly, Mr. Dowden? It's a bundle of documents, tab 3, and it's an email, and the reference is MET 00005713. Now, this is an email which wasn't sent to you or sent by you, so I don't expect you to have seen it before, Mr. Dowden. I'll just show you what it is. It's an email from Andy Walton. Well, it starts as an email from Charlie Pugsley to Ops Grenfell Tower, dated June the 19th, 2017. And it forwards, effectively, an email from Andy Walton of the 18th of June 2017 to Steve Apter, who is Director of Safety and Assurance, and the subject is official sensitive Grenfell Tower, significant information for investigation. And if you look at it, it says, and it's signed by Andy Walton, or sent by Andy Walton, and he's telling Mr. Apter in the first paragraph that I've just recalled an action or omission by me in the early stages of the Grenfell Tower incident, which I urgently bring to your attention. And then he says this: as I moved to take up the fire sector commander role, I passed through the lobby and encountered Watch Manager Dowden, G271 OIC, and original incident commander. I directed him to make sure the smoke extraction system was operating using the control panel on the wall in the lobby. Just pausing there, is that correct? Did he do that?
I can't remember if I got direction from Station Manager Andy Walton, no.
He then says he went to the panel, seemed to try and operate a touchpad on the screen and came back and said something like, it's not working or it is not operating. I cannot be sure of the exact wording. I'm just pausing there. Is that correct?
It'd be words to that effect, yes.
Yeah. And then he says, I know my understanding was that the system had failed and Watch Manager Dowden had tried to turn it on, but it was not responding. Is that correct?
I don't remember trying to actuate the panel itself. The only point that I had any sort of use of the keys when I took it out and went to, as I referred earlier, to the individual lobby area to try and actuate in that lobby area, not at the main panel.
Thank you very much. Now, can I go back earlier in the night to making pumps 8, which takes us to, as we saw from the short incident log, around about 1:19 in the morning. And you said in your statement on pages 4 and 5, and particularly the top of page 5, that you were not reassured due to the way the fire was developing on the outside of the building. And then just look with me, if you will, at paragraph, there's no paragraph, it's that's 7 lines down from the top of page 5. At 01:19 hours, I sent a message to control via my driver, Dan Bills, requesting further assistance and to make the incident pumps 8. At that point, did you have any thoughts about how the fire was behaving on the exterior?
The only thought I can relate that to is that I've not seen a building react in this way on the external before. Referring back to the incident we had at Trellick Tower 6 weeks prior to that, we had a half an hour delay of making entry into that compartment, and okay, the windows failed and it stayed within that compartment. This is about 20 minutes into the incident, and it wasn't behaving as I would expect from my previous experiences. So that's the only really sort of thoughts I had at that moment in time.
Did you have any thoughts drawn from your experience of Shepherd's Court?
I can't remember referring it back to Shepherd's Court, no.
Did you have any thoughts about considering the impact of the building materials on the behaviour of the fire and its spread?
No, because I wasn't aware at that point in time of the building materials on the external envelope of that building.
What was it that prompted you to increase the makeup from 6 pumps to 8 at that point, about 01:19?
Can only refer to the way that the fire was developing on outside that compartment on the external.
Did you discuss what you'd seen with anybody at that point?
I can't recall.
At that point, did you consider whether it was necessary to appoint a search coordinator?
No.
Did you, at that point, consider evacuation?
No. The only reason for that is I'm aware, obviously, that will be referenced into a policy, but at that moment in time, as I said before, things were rapidly developing and it was a very, very dynamic situation. Feeling very uncomfortable, at that point wasn't aware of what was happening internally within that building. And, you know, those decisions I made on that night, no sector commander, I didn't search sector commander or to evacuate the building at that point, no.
Did you start at that point to consider what you might do if the fire got out of control on the exterior?
I can't recall a point of that conscious thinking, but it doesn't mean to say I didn't or I did, but I think this is the point where I've started to become very consumed in terms of what was happening in front of me. I think the way it was increasing and developing, that I've never seen anything like that before, and it was almost that I was consumed by that in terms of the sensory overload, and yeah, and because of the way it was, and I do have some blanks, and it's very difficult to recall specific parts of that incident.
Can I ask you just one or two questions about what you knew or didn't know about what was happening inside the building at this point, around 01:19 on the night when you make pumps 8? First of all, were you aware of any reports from any residents or anyone inside the building reporting a fire on the 5th floor?
Not that I can remember internally, no.
Flat 26, specifically?
No.
Did you have any information about floor 6 at all at about that time?
Not that I can recall at that time, no.
At about that time, as I say, 01:19, roundabout, did you see any residents emerging from the tower?
On reflection, there may have been, but I cannot recall at that moment in time if there was people exiting the building.
Right. At that moment in time, let me see if I can help you remember where you were standing. So pumps 8, you ask him to make pumps 8, Danny Bills. Where were you standing? Do you know? Do you remember?
From my understanding, I was around where you had the start of the grassy verge, I believe, on the eastern elevation of the building still.
So you were, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but you were on the, is this right, on the east side of the building, underneath the fire, looking up?
Not directly underneath, at a safe distance back, but yes, that's roughly where I was.
Right.
I'm not saying that there was not people exiting, there probably was, but I don't have a recollection of it.
Can you explain how you made pumps 8, in the sense, who put the message across? Who sent the message? Remember?
From my memory, it was my driver, firefighter Dan Bills, who was a driver of Golf 271.
271?
Yes.
Yes, can I just ask you then about that? Could you please go back to bundle of documents, tab 23, page 17. This is the short incident log again. And there, at 1:19:35, we have make-up IUP G272, make pumps 8. So it looks, Mr. Dowden, as if according to the short incident log, the message had come from G272. But your recollection is that it was 271, is it?
Try and make a bit clear note. Dan Beals was a driver of Golf 271. It doesn't necessarily mean that the message was sent from Golf 271. He may well have sent, because of Golf 272 was the instant command pump still. I didn't specify what machine, I just wanted that message to go.
Yes, I see. Okay. Do you know of any, not that it may not matter very much, but just so we're clear, do you know of any reason why Danny Bills would have gone to 272 to send the message as opposed to 271?
No.
Which was nearer to the tower?
At that point, it would have been Golf 271.
Now, going back to the kind of question I asked you a bit earlier today about make-ups, is it normal procedure for a watch manager to be in charge at a fire where there are more than 6 pumps?
No, it's not normal.
And so the call to go from 6 to 8, who would that normally be made by?
The watch manager can make that call. We have the authority to call what resources we need if we can justify it. I wouldn't generally be in charge of a 6-pump fire or an 8-pump fire if a more senior officer was in attendance, unless there's mitigating circumstances. But I, as a watch manager, being an officer of London Fire Brigade, will have the authority to request that resource if I needed it and can justify it.
And what level of seniority or what rank would you expect to be involved as taking over as incident commander at 8 pumps?
When an incident is declared 8 pumps, a group manager will resume the role of incident commander, and a deputy assistant commissioner will then be notified as a monitoring officer.
And I think we know the answer to this, Mr. Dunn, but were you relieved of incident command at 8 pumps by a group manager?
No.
Do you know why not?
Just because of the way that incident was made up and how quickly that was made up. Generally, to where I resource it to, that's generally over a longer period of time, and we do have senior officers in attendance. But the way that fire developed, the resources meant that I was in charge for longer than usual because of the way that fire developed.
Yes. Now, at that point, having asked for a make-up to 8 pumps at 01:19 or so, when the message gets sent, did you think you could control the exterior fire spread?
I'm going to be honest, and from some of the decisions I took a bit later on, I would say yes.
You did. How did you think you were going to do that?
One of my decisions was, and when I had the first FR fire rescue unit crew in attendance, and this is referenced in my statement, I detailed them to make their way to roof level. The fire rescue unit is not a frontline pumping appliance; they have specialist equipment. Part of their equipment is line-ups capability, and basically what that allows them to do is work at height. Without referencing it to my statement and the timings, I wouldn't be able to give you that. But I tasked them to, if they could, make an attempt to get to roof level and try and get water from above the fire onto it in terms of some kind of replicating a drencher system. So I would say that would suggest that yes, I was still thinking that we would try and put this fire out.
So at that stage, 01:19, you're thought process was to attack the fire by applying water from above the fire.
I wouldn't say it was at that point, but there was a point that is referred to in my statement that was my thinking. So I would still be on the same train of thought that I would be looking to extinguish this fire.
Okay. What about an aerial appliance? Would you have been able to control the fire at that point, 0119, if you'd had an aerial appliance, do you think?
That's very difficult to comment on. We didn't. I can't comment on that. The aerial turned up when it did. We got it to work as quickly as we could. I didn't have it at that moment in time, so I can't comment.
You talk about going up the building to roof level, and this may be a speculative question, Mr. Dowden, but did you think at the time that it would be possible to go to a lower level, say the 12th floor, and downward hose the exterior from there? But
at that point that I made that decision with the FIU crew, the fire was already pretty much at roof level.
Yeah, okay. At that point, again, 0119, when pumps get made up to 8, did you assess the risk that flats now exposed to the flame front might be penetrated by an external fire?
I can't remember that thought process coming into my head, but again, with the way that fire was developing and how dynamic it was, it was just, I was trying to make the best decisions I could in terms of my previous experience and what I was seeing in front of me. I had never experienced anything like this before.
And just on that last answer, let me see if I can dig a bit further. Are you saying that you had never experienced fire on the exterior breaking back into a flat in a high-rise block higher than the compartment of origin?
Not at the rate it was developing, no.
Had you ever had that experience?
Not as an instant commander, but I have seen it on the instant ground, yes.
You have. When was that? Do you remember?
That would be at the Shepherd's Court fire.
Shepherd's Court. So when you saw the fire developing up the exterior at about 119, did you have any thoughts about Shepherd's Court and a repeated experience?
Can't remember at that moment in time, no.
Now, it was a warm June night. Did you have any thoughts about the effect of people having their windows open and what that might mean given the development of the fire?
I'd like to have thought that the traffic, I had some kind of traffic going into the bridgehead in terms of making some action in terms of getting crews internally to go to the floors above. It's only from reading the statement, the LFB response, we did have crews on that 5th floor firefighting. So I don't have any recollection of that traffic going from me into the bridgehead, but there are big gaps in my memory in terms of when I was in charge of that incident because of the amount of information that was coming in. I referred to it again, the sensory overload. And, this was an unprecedented fire, an unprecedented rate that I found myself in trying to do the best and with all good intent to try and suppress and, as an incident commander, carry out my duties.
Yes. I fear that many of the questions I'm going to ask you from now on may have the same answer, which is fine. But
I can only apologise for that because there is, when I was the incident commander of that incident, there is some, real big blurs and blanks, because I think purely, I keep referring to, the amount of information that was coming in. It was just the way that fire was developing. It's been a real struggle of mine since, that trying to recall those events has been really, really difficult.
Do you remember having any thoughts about whether compartmentation on the inside of the building would hold up?
Not that I can recall.
Did you have any thoughts at about this time, 119, 120, whether as to what fire survival guidance should be given to 999 callers who might be calling control?
At that point, I wasn't aware that fire survival guidance was in process.
Right. Did you have any thoughts about whether the stay put advice, as the standing advice as it was had continued to be safe advice to be given to any resident who called?
At that point in time, from my recollection, I didn't receive any information in terms of the internal conditions within that building that would warrant me to change that advice.
Now, at Pumps 8, it's right, isn't it, that there's a predetermined attendance under the mobilisation policy for 2 command units?
That's correct.
And you knew that at the time, did you?
I was aware, yes.
Yes. So is it right that at that time, 120, you were expecting 2 command units to turn up?
At some point. Obviously, it's not a quick process. Again, they have to be, like any mobilisation, the makeup will be received by control. That will be picked up, the division will pick that up, allocate to the nearest available command unit, and then the command unit team will be mobilised. They'll have to obviously then get onto the command unit itself and be mobile to the incident. So there is a delay, like any attendance from the point of call.
Yeah. When these command units were status 2, were you made aware?
That's not something at the incident you're generally made aware of, no.
No. And what about status 3?
No.
But you see them, I suppose.
That's when you see, the first in attendance when the command unit team leader will present himself to you as the incident commander. Right.
Now, we have in our record CU8, which is Fulham, as the first CU command unit to arrive at the incident, and we have that time at 01:30:48. Do you remember being aware of the arrival of that command unit?
Yes, I do.
When it arrived, did you make any use of it?
At that point, that was the first time aware we had fire survival guidance in progress.
Right, just walk me through that then.
Yep.
So you see CU8 arrive, Fulham, at about 1:30. That's when it arrives. What did you do? Did you go up to it?
No, I didn't go up to the team leader. I can't remember his name. He came onto the fire ground and he presented himself to me, because at that point I was still wearing the instant commander tabard.
Yes, okay. And do you remember where CU8 was parked?
No, I don't.
Was it near the tower or far?
It wouldn't have been near the tower because of the access into Grenfell Tower is just by Grenfell Road, and by that time we had other fire appliances in attendance.
Right. Just help me, maybe you don't know, but how long would it take to walk at a good pace between the tower and CU8 when it had parked?
I wouldn't be able to comment on that because I don't know where CU8 was located.
Is it important, generally, in your experience, to have the command unit, when it arrives, at 8 pumps, near the incident? Or does it not matter?
You want it in a close location, because obviously but in a sensible location in terms of not too far away from the incident. But yeah, you don't want it right on top of the incident. But it was difficult at Grenfell Tower because of the Grenfell Road and the access difficulties for the appliances. That was an issue.
Yes, it was an issue. All right. Can I just go back to an answer you gave a minute ago and follow up on it? You said, I think, that it was on the arrival of CU8 that you first became aware of that fire survival guidance calls were in process. Is that your evidence?
That is referred into my statement. Yes.
Yes. That's what you recall.
Yes.
So who told you? Do you remember that fire survival guidance calls were in process?
From my recollection and from what I had in my statement, it was the command unit team leader.
Right. So do I take it that nobody from the control room had contacted you or the ICP 271 to tell either you or whoever was in the ICP that fire survival guidance calls were in progress?
There may have been attempts, but I was unaware at that point.
And what did you learn about the fire survival guidance calls from the CU8 personnel?
That point in time, I think that a statement was we got multiple FS fire survival guidance in progress, and at a very sort of similar time, I had another senior officer that was in attendance now at the incident, Station Manager Brett Loft.
Sorry, Brett?
Brett Loft.
No, Brett Loft, yes. Yes. Okay. And he was on the incident ground when?
From my recollection, it was almost simultaneously that the command unit team leader was in attendance.
Right, okay. Now, I'm going to come back to some detail on that, Mr. Dowden, but at that moment, I just want to get an understanding of what you got by way of the picture of fire survival guidance calls. What was your impression when you first learnt that they were in progress about the volume of fire survival guidance calls?
I can't remember I got a specific number in terms of the volume of fire survival guidance calls.
No, but was it your impression that there were some, a lot, a few?
Well, it was multiple. So
multiple.
Yeah.
Did you ask how many are we talking about?
I can't recall I did that. No.
And did you gain any kind of understanding about where in the building the fire survival guidance calls were coming from and to? In other words, which floors or flats that fire survival guidance calls were being made in respect of?
No. At the point that we had the command unit team leader in attendance, as I referred to earlier, we had Station Manager Brett Loft was also in attendance. Now, if a more senior officer attends the fire ground, then it is their responsibility to take over from the junior officer in charge at that point in time, which was myself. A decision was taken between myself and Brett Loft that at that point in time, the most important thing, my priority, and was the multiple fire survival guidance calls that we had. So the decision was made that Brett Loft, the station manager, would not take over the incident, but the priority was for him to take the team leader from the command unit, and he was to take ownership and manage the fire survival guidance calls, and the decision was for him directly to liaise with Brian O'Keefe, who by that point was in charge of the resourcing up on the bridgehead. And because there was multiple FSGs going on, there was a decision made not to use the incident command channel, which was channel 1, but to go to a dedicated different channel, which was channel 3. So we can have that channel dedicated to managing the fire survival guidance traffic or radio traffic, and how we're going to resource that up to the bridgehead. I just want to also clarify that as soon as the authority, the London Fire Brigade, receives fire survival guidance, that will attract its own predetermined attendance. So we have, as soon as we receive that information that we have someone in a premise or property that is trapped and they cannot leave safely by normal means, immediately we will mobilise a command unit, a station manager, a pump ladder with a watchman in charge solely to manage the fire survival guidance procedure, because its own specific task, and that is additional to any attendance that's already been made. Because of understanding that, I thought at that time, and that was the thinking with Brett Loft, the most important thing at that moment in time was to have a real strict control measure, and rather than Brett Loft take over, me delay time in handing over to Brett Loft, the most vital and most time critical thing was for him to take ownership of the fire survival guidance calls with the team leader of Command Unit 8.
And just on that last answer, you say it would be you'd mobilise a command unit, a station manager and a pump ladder with a watch manager in charge solely to manage the fire survival guidance procedure. Did that happen?
If the policy and procedure was followed, that was something that the control operator would have managed. But that's not something we manage at the fireground. That's done by the control centre. At that night was at Stratford.
Right, and you refer to a pump ladder with a watch manager in charge, and I just wonder whether it was that happened, or whether it was Control Unit 8, Command Unit 8 with Brett Loft instead or as well. Do you remember?
From my understanding, Brett Loft wasn't mobilised as the FSG coordinator, as a station manager. No.
Was there an FSG coordination manager mobilised? Do you remember?
I would not be able to confirm. That would have to be confirmed by the control room staff.
Now, can you go back to your statement, please, and be shown page 5? I'm now going to turn to the topic of make pumps 10. And in the middle of page 5 of your statement, you say, after the reference to the crowd and the police attendants, you say, I also made the decision to make the incident pumps 10 as the fire was rapidly developing beyond the flat on the outside of the tower. Do you remember where you were standing when you made that decision?
I couldn't give an exact location, but just from my recollection, for most of that incident, I was around the east elevation of that tower, around the start of the grassy verge.
Did you discuss that decision with anybody?
Not that I can recall. There may have been traffic going into the bridgehead or coming back from the bridgehead, which wouldn't be uncommon, because obviously you give that authority to whoever's in charge of that resource, that bridgehead, and if they need additional resources, then they're your eyes and ears internally within that building. So that would help you to come to that decision. But I don't recall any traffic being sent or received.
Let's just see if I can prompt a recollection. Mr. O'Keefe's contemporaneous notes and his statement recalled that, and this is his recollection, I think, and we'll examine it with him, but he says he told you of the sudden spread of fire and urged you to make pumps 10. Is that right? Do you remember that?
I don't remember that, but that may be a true account of what happened, and that's generally something that happens if that decision has been, or that role has been given to an officer at the bridgehead, and that's going to assist me to make, or an officer in charge to make attend for further resources, then yes, because that was his task to resource the bridgehead with BA, and if more resource was needed to come through myself. But I cannot recall receiving that traffic, but that's not to say it didn't happen.
He was at the bridgehead at this time, or by this time, and you were on the outside. I know you can't recall whether that's what happened, but if that is what happened, do you remember having any impression about what he could see on the inside of the building that you couldn't see because you were on the outside of the building? Do you remember having an impression or thought about that at the time?
Not that I can remember, no.
Okay. Now, according to the short incident log, and I don't need to get back to it with you, the time of the making of the make-up to pumps 10 was 01:24:09. Would that agree with your memory, roughly?
Could you just repeat that, sorry?
Yes, according to the short incident log, that the message to make pumps 10 was sent at 01:24:09. And would that agree with your memory, roughly?
I don't have a distinct timeline in my memory of that night. The only way I can refer to it would be back either to my statement, and that was taken from vision, so that would be correct, yes.
Do you have a recollection about being asked for additional BA wearers at about that time?
Don't have an actual recollection of that, but that would be potentially part of the thought process in terms of further resourcing the incident.
Right. You see, Mr. O'Keefe says, and we'll obviously explore it with him as well, but he says that he sent an urgent request for additional BA wearers to you because there were now numerous calls for rescue on many floors. Do you remember that?
No, I don't.
So we're now at 01:24, and we've gone from 6 pumps to 10 pumps in 11 minutes or so. 01:13, 6 pumps, and 01:24, 10 pumps. Was that an increase in demand for appliances that you had ever experienced before?
Not at that time, at that short time scale, no.
No. So did you realise, even at that point, 01:24, that you were dealing with something beyond your own experience?
That's a fair assumption, yes.
What did that tell you about the nature of this fire?
It's something that I, as an incident commander, have never witnessed before. And I'm sure that many people on that fire ground have never witnessed before either.
Did you have any thoughts about how you were going to bring this fire under control?
I can only refer back to the statement in terms that, later on that I was still, with all good intent, that hopefully we would have to put that fire out with the further resources that were going to be coming in attendance.
And a similar question to one I asked before, is it normal procedure for a watch manager to be incident commander at a 10-pump fire?
No, it's not.
And who, in terms of rank, would normally make the call to make pumps 10?
Again, I have referred to it. Me as a watch manager would be given that authority to request that resource if I felt it was adequate and I would need that resource and there's a justification for it. But the assumption is that I wouldn't resume command of a 10-pump fire for a long period of time.
And what about having an assistant commissioner as monitoring officer at that point? Would that be something you might expect?
Yes.
Did you have any expectation that an assistant commissioner would arrive soon?
I had an expectation there would be senior officers very soon, yes.
And what did the fact that you were still in command, as I see, despite the rate of escalation of the make-up, tell you about the way the fire was behaving?
It was behaving in terms of, particularly for me as an incident commander, in an unprecedented scale. It's something that I've never witnessed before. Having to make those very quick decisions in that dynamic stage, and dynamic stage generally, incident will be something that's you can get on top of it, you can handle it with the resources you've got. But that just kept the dynamic stage of that incident for a long time, and trying to resource it to try and have it try and get under control was very, very, very difficult.
Now, at this point in time, about 1:24, when you make pumps 10, do you remember where the fire had spread to on the east elevation of the tower?
Not at that time. It's difficult to put a timeline on exactly at 1:26 where I remember where that fire was developing to.
Right, and we have got video evidence, but I'm not going to show it to you. But would you take it from me that, just for the purposes of these next few questions, that at that point, about 1:24, the fire was rapidly spreading to the top of the east elevation? That's what the video evidence would show. Is that something that you remember?
I remember it rapidly developing up the side of the eastern elevation, but I would not have any reference to time.
Right.
But from obviously your statement, then that would be true, yes.
And seeing the extent of the height of the flame plume, at that point, having made pumps 10, did you have any thoughts about whether, if callers were calling for fire survival guidance, what guidance they should be given? Did you have any thoughts or ideas about that?
Can't remember at that point in time, no.
Did you have any thoughts about the stay put advice and whether that was safe advice to give if callers called?
I would say not at that point, but I think it's important to clarify. I think around that sort of time I only had 6, from looking back at the division log, we had 6 fire appliances in attendance at that time. From my understanding, most of them were consumed in terms of the BA resource at the bridgehead. For me, at that moment in time, to facilitate and change the stay put policy to a full evacuation was impossible. I didn't have the resource at that time. We're looking at 20 floors above the fire floor with just 6 fire engines in attendance, 1 central staircase. It's something I've never experienced as an instant commander before. As I said, I was very, very much out of my comfort zone. I just don't know how that could have been done with the resources we had in attendance at that moment in time.
Did the thoughts that you've just articulated in your evidence just now, were those thoughts that you had at the time?
They're not thoughts that I had at the time, but that's a reflective thought that I've had a lot of time to think and process the event, which I didn't have on that night. Didn't have the time for those reflective and moments. I was reacting in a way that I thought was best with all my previous experience in something that I'd never witnessed before, and yeah.
Understand. Now, in the middle of page 6 of your statement, and I'm going to just ask you whether you're all right to continue.
I'm fine to continue.
Okay for a bit.
It's for another 10 minutes.
That's fine.
Okay. Let me just focus you onto your statement. And if you look with me, together we'll look at page 6. In the middle of page 6, in the middle of page 6, you say between 0125 and 0128, I received information from Watch Manager Brian O'Keefe, who was on the bridgehead at this point, that we had reports of one person not able to leave the property on the 11th floor and another on the 16th floor. Now, I'll go on with the rest of that in a minute. I just want to ask you about that evidence. Your time you give us there is between 125 and 128. And my question is, how can you, when you were doing your statement, how could you be so precise?
I think from when I made that statement with the Metropolitan Police, it was between, those are 2 times I didn't record any times of the incident, but referring back to the vision, that was the time of 2 different makeups. So that's the only real point of reference I have is referring anything back to when I made the incident up.
Right. I see. And you had reports of one person not being able to leave the property on the 11th floor and another on the 16th floor, as you say there. And you go on to say this wasn't because of the fire itself, but was due to them having mobility issues and illness. Now, can I show you a more contemporaneous record? It's a bundle of documents, tab 2, and it's the record of a PRC meeting which you had on the 3rd of July 2017. And so Dan, will you forgive me? I've made a mistake. It's LFB, doesn't matter, I can do it this way. It's LFB 00003117. You can get it up on the screen. And it's tab 24 of the bundle. And if you go to the first page is a typed document, PRC Chairs Brief, Grenfell Tower, 14th June. Welcome to participants. And it's a note of a meeting on that day at which it looks as if the incident commanders who were present on the night all attended, running from you, G271, all the way up to Danny Cotton. You see that?
Yes.
Yeah. Do you remember being at this meeting?
Yes, I do.
Could you just tell me, what does PRC stand for?
It's a performance review of commands. So we have 2 procedures we follow following any significant incident of 4 pumps or above, any makeup. So the first one is a PRO, performance review of operations, and that's for all who attended the incident, from firefighters up, to basically discuss the incident, have a debrief. The PRC is purely for the incident commanders and decision makers in terms of a debrief on how the incident went in terms of incident command, and that will inform future practice in terms of any learning outcomes.
Right. And if you go on in the document, please, to should be page 5, you can see that this is some manuscript which says PRC Grenfell Tower, time 0800 hours, 3rd of July 2017, ICI Mike Dowden. The first question is that handwriting yours, or is it the handwriting of somebody you don't recognise?
That's not my handwriting,
right.
No.
Do you remember how the meeting went? Was there somebody taking a note of what you were saying?
There's all PRCs will be chaired by someone, and this meeting was chaired by our Tom George, Director of Operations.
Right. Okay. And you can see a signature at the bottom of that page, T. George. So do we think that that's his writing? I mean, I don't know if you know, or if you don't know.
I can only assume by the signature that he's right. I've never seen his writing before.
Right. Well, it won't matter very much. I just want to ask you 1 or 2 very short points about the contents of the document at this stage. If you turn to the next page, you can see that at the top it says FF Bills told him to set up Ground Monitor, made it ready, and then about 6 lines down from that, do you see it says WM O'Keefe at BH? Told me people on 11th and 16th floors that couldn't leave, non-ambulant. So my first question is that a recollection that you had independently of what happened on the night, on what Watch Manager O'Keefe told you?
That will reflect in terms of my statements. That was the same. That's what I was referring to in my statement in terms of the traffic I received from Watch Manager O'Keefe at the bridgehead. That we had reports of an individual on 11th and 16th floor that weren't trapped by the fire itself, but one due to illness and one due to injury.
Right. And when you use the can I just ask, did you use the expression non-ambulant? You remember?
I may have done in the PRC. I may have done. I can't remember.
What did you mean by that?
People have mobility issues.
Okay. And do you know where Watch Manager O'Keefe got the information from that there were people on the 11th and 16th floors with mobility issues?
I don't know exactly. I can only presume that was from people within the tower, other residents within the tower, within those floors or the flats on that floor.
Do you remember when Watch Manager O'Keefe told you that there were people on the 11th and 16th floors who couldn't get out because they had mobility issues?
At what time?
Yes, roughly.
Again, I don't have a specific timeline of events, and the only way I could reference it is when I had the make-ups, as I put in my previous statement, my MPS statement. So I can't be actually specific on the time.
So summarising it, is this your evidence that sometime between, as you say, 125 and 128, between the make-ups, Watch Manager O'Keefe told you that there were people on the 11th and 16th floors who couldn't get out because they had mobility issues. Sometime between that.
That's correct, yes.
Now, at that time, did you ask him where he got that information from?
I cannot recall that conversation happened. Again, it may have done, but I don't have a recollection.
What did the information that he was giving you about non-ambulant people on those floors mean to you at the time?
I suppose at that moment in time there was a potential for further fire spread or compromise of compartmentation internally in the building. That's a really important piece of information, because I had reports that they would need assistance to get out of the building. So
what did you do with the information?
I had it written, because I remember it was quite a clear direction from Watch Manager O'Keefe. I had an IC's notepad, so I remember scribing it down on my IC's notepad. Now, this may not be a true account of what actually happened that night, or whether this is a reflection I've had since, but I have a vague memory of could we get a BA crew to monitor these two individuals on the 11th and 16th floor. I can't 100% confirm whether that's something I gave clear direction on the night, or whether that's something that I'm post-incident I've been polluted with, so I can't confirm that.
And do you remember whether the fact that there were people who needed rescuing on the 11th and 16th floors, do you remember whether that fact told you anything about how the fire was behaving inside the building?
I've got to be clear that my understanding, it wasn't that they needed rescuing, it was that they weren't able to leave the property by themselves. So from my understanding, it wasn't they needed rescuing, it was a case of, for information purposes, if we needed to rescue, that they would need a rescue if that part of the building would be involved. So that was my understanding at that moment in time.
Was Mr. O'Keefe, Watch Manager O'Keefe, saying anything to you about evacuation?
Not that I can remember that time, no.
One more question, Mr. Dowden. Do you remember anybody saying anything to you at that stage about somebody needing rescuing on floor 18?
No, I don't.
Mr. Dowden, thank you very much. It's very nearly 4 o'clock. Mr. Chairman, I've got more questions, but I am going to turn to a slightly different topic moving forward in the night. That
So
might be a
this is a
convenient
good
point.
We're going to stop now, Mr. Dowden. I'm afraid that Mr. Millett does have more questions we'd like to have your help on. So I hope you're going to be able to come back tomorrow. Is that going to be possible?
That's possible, yes.
Right, thank you. Mr. Millett, what time do you think we should start tomorrow?
I think if we say 9:30, that would be helpful.
Yeah. Well, would that cause you great inconvenience to start at 9:30?
No, I could be in attendance.
That would be all right.
That's fine.
All right, well then
Great.
we'll finish now. Please remember not to talk about your evidence to anyone overnight. And we'll resume at 9:30 tomorrow.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much. You leave us now. All right. Thank you, everyone. 9:30 tomorrow.